Okay, he's gonna review that Dan Brown, but what's he gonna wear? Well, he's looking. He's thinking about it. Oh, it's the yellow. It's the yellow. That means this album is gonna be a classic. It's gonna be a 10. It's gonna be a 10, baby. He's wearing the yellow. This album's probably gonna be an 11. It's gonna be the first 11. He's wearing the yellow. Might even be a 12. Could be a 12. A 12 classic. Hi everyone, Don't Thinny Talk Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Danny Brown album, Atrocity Exhibition. Grimy Detroit rapper Danny Brown is back with his highly anticipated follow-up to his 2013 album, Old, which was a commercial change of pace from his breakout mixtape, XXX. Now, Old, it was a decent record. However, it was packed with way more festival bangers and indie pop crossover features than I had really wanted. The whole record didn't really come off as raw and as adventurous and as personal as XXX did. I get it though, Danny had a new audience who loved his party songs, and he wanted to feed that demand. And I feel like he had chased after those more mainstream aspirations without selling himself super short artistically. And I was kind of curious as to where he would go from this album, because it seemed like he could continue to make twerk anthems until every attendee at Coachella had OD'd. But given his knack for lyricism and flow, his kind of wild, artsy side, Danny has the potential to go down in hip-hop history as one of the most unique MCs to do it. And it seems almost like that's the reputation he's aiming for on this latest record over here. And going into this album, I expected as much given the really grim, dark, disturbing cover. Also, the label change on this thing, switching over to Warp Records. How could this album not be experimental in some significant way? Also, when he initially dropped the When It Rains single, I wanted to know if he was going to take sort of more of a party direction with this new record as well. And it turned out to just be one of the most batshit insane things he had ever recorded. What would have been surprising is if this album had ended up tame by any stretch of the imagination, and it certainly didn't. It's not tame. To the point where I think Danny might turn off some of his more basic listeners with this record, who wanted to come for the high, but they didn't want to stick around for the withdrawal. On Atrocity Exhibition, we go back to the more raw, personal angle of XXX, but now we are going further down that rabbit hole of life-crushing addiction, dope fiends, and mental illness. And Danny complements these tracks with some of the weirdest flows and instrumentals he's ever worked with. Right from the introductory track Downward Spiral, which is a concept, an idea, a thing Danny has rapped about in the past. The vivid lyrics on this track are pretty much all about the rut that Danny finds himself in. But the oddest thing about the track is the instrumental that Danny seems to be spitting on, which sounds like some kind of weird psych rock passage with sunburnt guitars that blossom in the chorus. Danny sounds less like a rapper on this track and more like the frontman of some kind of weird underground band. It's an odd but very fitting introduction to this album, and things get odder on the next cut, Tell Me What I Don't Know, which features these breakbeats and analog synthesizers and what sounds like, I don't know, some kind of weird synth whistle sample. Stuttering away as Danny raps about what seems like a point earlier in his life where he's making reference to a friend who died when he was younger, living a fast life. And this track is delivered in a very low-key, somber tone of voice, not the trademark yelp that you're used to listening to from Danny Brown. And he typically will go softer, he typically will go quieter and rap in a more normal register when he is touching down on a topic that seems to be very depressing for him. That yelp, that scream, that shout, he transitions back to it on the song Really Dough, which is a fantastic posse cut that I had waited to listen to all the way through. It's everything that I hoped it would be and more, featuring features from Ab-Soul, Kendrick Lamar, Earl Sweatshirt, a banger beat from Black Milk with this great piece of percussion, this great percussive loop topped with what sounds like a very eerie set of glockenspiel arpeggios. Ding, 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 ding. Every verse on this track is great. I honestly can't pick which one is my favorite, but I will say the highlight kind of is Earl, who does bring in his verse last, and the reason why is that I did not expect him to go so crazy and aggressive with it. Not that I think he's incapable of that. I just think it's great that he matched the energy of the track so nicely. On the song Lost, the downward spiral of this album continues as Danny tells this grim tale of drug dealing, with hilarious opening lines to both of his verses like, I'm Spielberg with ill words and hose on that curb, gotta screw loose, I'm cuckoo, mentally disturbed, and I'm like Kubrick with 2 bricks and hose on the strip, off a 2-piece, a toothpick, I flick and I preach. The beat also features this really odd, stuttering groove that doesn't quite make sense to my ears, but Danny rides on top of it as if this beat is as smooth as butter. Now the album shifts gears at this point a little bit. It's kind of like the experimental levies just really break open, and Danny introduces some of the weirdest tracks in the track listing here, which makes this point in the album pretty volatile. Like on the song Ain't It Funny, which blows my mind every time I listen to it. Danny's wild delivery seems like it's intensified even more as he's rapping on top of these honking, blurting, blaring horn sections and this really simple 1-2 beat. It's really something to behold. And then the next few cuts, for me, go so weird that they're almost challenging, more challenging than they are entertaining. Like on the song Gold Dust, which has a bit of a post-punky instrumental in the background. Makes sense given that I think there's a Joy Division sample back there of the song Atrocity Exhibition, obviously a reference point to the title, or the title reference point to that. You know what I'm saying. There's some weird horns worked in there. Sounds like almost like a Middle Eastern groove, the way that the song is kind of chopped up. Danny comes through with this relentlessly insane flow that barely holds on to the instrumental. He's like an animal on top of this beat. It's like he doesn't even care if he syncs up with it all the way. And he almost overpowers it with the volume of his voice too. It's like I can barely make out what the instrumental is doing a lot of the time. He's just rapid fire rapping all over this track as if he had just taken all of the uppers that he's making so many direct references to in his lyrics. And the song White Lines I found to be a little difficult to swallow at first, but ultimately it did grow on me. The track features this booming beat and these really weird sporadic lead melodies that are laid down by the Alchemist on this instrumental, and Danny sees fit to just syncopate his flow with these melodies. Da 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 da. And it creates a pretty weird effect. And it's on this track that it becomes apparent to me that we're just traveling further down this Atrocity Exhibition rabbit hole, traveling further down this downward spiral, and it seems like the more pleasure Danny seeks, the less pleasure he actually has, the more pain and fear he actually has to deal with, especially at the end of this track where he is afraid or makes mention of the fact that this might be his time to go. He might OD this time. We have the eerie banger Pneumonia, which has this soul-crushing chord progression to it, and some really eerie ding, like synth notes that just ring out, just echo out very strangely. Sounds like something out of a horror movie. Shout out to Evian Christ on this instrumental here. Schoolboy Q adds a little ad-lib stuff in the background, like some guest vocals, but not a verse, not a hook or anything like that. But his voice does add quite a bit to the song. And Danny goes absolutely freakish on a lot of these verses, shouting at the top of his lungs about the subtleties of drug dealing, from the broken scale that he's now trying to eyeball his drugs because of as he's sort of packing them up, to powder stains on his clothes. And the song Dance in the Water is another hype, mind-blowing moment, maybe the most explosive track on the entire album, featuring a music sample that I cannot even start to like put a finger on. It's got kind of a watery post-punky bass line, but then on top of that, like these primal drums and what sounds like these tribal chants. And if you want to know what this song is about, you need to look no further than the hook on here as Danny sings over and over. Dance in the water and not get wet, dance in the water and not get wet, essentially playing with fire and not getting burned. Living on the edge, but not paying the ultimate price. That is Danny Brown's mission statement. That is the theme of this album. The song From the Ground with Kalele Gabriella, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I'm sorry if I didn't, has a very eerie and pretty beat to it. It's a very much needed cool down moment in the track listing here. Lyrically, it is kind of Danny Brown's Started from the Bottom. Not to make a direct comparison to Drake, but this is a little bit of an origin story for Danny Brown, I guess. Talking about the foundation he needed to lay down in order to get to where he is today. It's also one of several tracks on this record that I wish were a little bit longer, but there's an element to this record that reminds me a little bit of like Mad Villainy, in that there are so many tracks here that just end so quickly, just coming really quick with an idea, a theme, a story, and then they leave you and just right on to the next one. The song When It Rained is another cut that sounds like no rap song I've ever heard. And that's the thing about this record. There's so many tracks on this thing that are like, where the hell did this even come from? Like, what fucking planet was Danny on when he was coming up with this record, when his producers were coming up with these beats? I mean, I'm sure there are tons of weird experimental beats in the vaults of guys like The Alchemist, but for him to like come across these beats and be like, yeah, I could totally just be on that beat and come up with a great song with it. These are not instrumentals that rappers would usually hop on top of. Like, these are whacked out beats. Anyway, with When It Rained, the song's driving kick drums and its jerky horn sample are absolutely insane. Also, that rattling sound effect that sounds like something out of a cowboy movie. And on the song Today, I mean, Danny's lyrics on this track, describing sort of where he's coming from and what he's avoiding via the life that he's living through music and going on the road and all that, is borderline frightening, and that's only intensified with the very tense "today, today, today" refrain on the track. Now, the song Get High is sort of another much needed cool down. You know, he does a good job of sort of providing these tracks that are more blissful or more low key, or more easy on the ears when he sort of hits you with something that's just off the fucking wall. And this song features Be Real, which I think was actually a great feature because it was sort of an aha moment for me. I didn't really put two and two together until I had heard this track and had realized that, wow, you know, Cypress Hill is kind of a really obvious influence point for Danny Brown that I've never really thought of before. And now that Be Real is kind of on this track, sort of doing a really weird, almost Danny Brown inspired delivery, singing very sarcastically about getting high, it all kind of makes sense. And Danny Brown's lyrics on this track, again, also very sarcastic and are all about how, you know, your pockets are on E, all these hardships, all these struggles, but ultimately getting high to escape these things is a fool's errand. It's a futile effort. Now, with the song Hell For It, Danny Brown kind of wraps the whole theme of the record up by almost chalking it up to being a cautionary tale, talking about how this is the life that I lead, these are the things that I do, so you don't necessarily have to. Now, that's just the track listing. The album overall, super impressed with it. Danny has reached another artistic peak. Not only are his lyrics once again very well thought out, very personal, very vivid and descriptive, sometimes hilarious as well, finding some elements of dark or black comedy in the midst of all this pain and suffering that he's constantly describing. Now, the instrumentals on this thing take this album to a whole nother level. Those and the flows. Combined, they create a sound that is not only unlike any Danny Brown release thus far, also unlike any rap release I've heard thus far. As far as contemporary, experimental, and abrasive hip-hop records go, this could go toe-to-toe with the best of them. This is like some mind-expanding shit. And again, I don't think everybody's gonna like it. I don't think everybody's gonna get it, especially given just how catchy Danny's last record was. This is like, you know, really like some off-the-deep-end stuff. Hopefully his fans stick with him and keep their minds open for what he's doing here, because I really do think he's making some of his best music yet on this project. I'm feeling a light to decent 9 on this thing.
I'll take a 9. 9 is fine.
Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry if you hate my thoughts on this record, though you can leave a comment. Cool? Cool. Danny Brown, Atrocity Exhibition, forever.